The Galactic Military Academy floated in the void between stars, a massive structure of gleaming metal and energy shields that housed the most promising young warriors from across the galaxy. Within its training halls, cadets from hundreds of worlds learned the art of war under the guidance of seasoned instructors from the most militaristic species in known space. Commander Thexakar stood 8 feet tall, his chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh training facility lights. As a Vorthak, he was bred for combat, his forearms ending in razor-sharp claws that could slice through reinforced steel. His species had conquered 17 star systems through pure martial prowess, and Thexakar himself had never lost a single combat encounter in his 43 years of service. He took immense pride in breaking the spirit of young cadets, molding them into proper soldiers through pain and humiliation. Today's training session involved hand-to-hand combat assessment, and Thexakar's mandibles clicked with anticipation as he surveyed the mixed group of alien cadets before him. There were sleek Zephyrians with their blue-scaled skin, heavily muscled Gorlons from the high-gravity mining worlds, and even a few delicate ethereals whose telepathic abilities made them valuable despite their physical frailty. And then there was the human. Cadet Sarah Chen stood barely 5.5 feet tall, her dark hair pulled back in regulation style. Her brown eyes held a calm intensity that Thexakar found both amusing and irritating. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, their homeworld Earth having only made contact 3 years ago. What made it worse was that Earth had been classified as a Class Thuth Deathworld, a designation reserved for planets so hostile that most civilized species considered them uninhabitable. The classification seemed like a cosmic joke to Thexakar. This small, soft-skinned creature before him looked nothing like the monsters that should emerge from such a hellish place. Humans had no natural weapons, no thick hide or exoskeleton, no venomous fangs or acidic blood. They were just ordinary, disappointingly ordinary. "Today we practice close-quarters combat," Thexakar announced, his translator converting his clicking speech into standard galactic. "I will demonstrate proper technique by sparring with each of you. The lesson is simple. Learn your limitations before the enemy teaches them to you in blood." The other cadets straightened nervously. Thexakar's demonstrations were infamous throughout the academy. He had hospitalized dozens of students over the years, always claiming it was for their own good. The academy administration looked the other way because the Vorthak military provided significant funding and their training methods, while brutal, produced results. "Cadet Gelton, step forward," Thexakar commanded. The young Zephyrian moved with liquid grace, his natural speed allowing him to dance around Thexakar's initial attacks. But the Vorthak had centuries of experience, and within moments he had the cadet pinned to the ground, one clawed hand pressed against the student's throat. "Speed without strength is useless against a prepared opponent," Thexakar lectured, releasing the gasping cadet. Next. One by one, the students faced the commander. The Gorlon cadet managed to land a solid blow before being overwhelmed by Thexakar's four-armed assault. The ethereal didn't even try to fight physically, instead attempting to use telepathic confusion, only to discover that Vorthak mental conditioning made them immune to such attacks. Finally, only Cadet Chen remained. "Ah, the Deathworlder," Thexakar said, his mandibles spreading in what might have been a smile. "Step forward, human. Let us see what your supposedly dangerous world has taught you." Sarah moved to the center of the training mat with calm, measured steps. She raised her hands in a basic defensive stance, feet shoulder-width apart. To Thexakar's experienced eye, her form looked adequate but unremarkable. "Tell me, Cadet Chen," Thexakar said as he began to circle her, "what makes your world so dangerous that the Galactic Council classifies it as uninhabitable? You seem quite fragile." Predators, mostly, Sarah replied calmly. Environmental hazards, weather systems that can level cities, diseases that evolve faster than we can cure them, the usual. Thexkar's laugh was like grinding metal. And yet here you stand, soft and weak. Perhaps the classification system needs revision? Without warning, he lunged forward with his primary right arm, claws extended toward Sarah's chest. It was a move that had caught countless cadets off guard, designed to test reflexes and fear response. Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped into the attack at an angle, her left hand deflecting his arm while her right drove toward his elbow joint. The strike was precise, targeting the one weak point in Vorthak anatomy that most species didn't know about. Thexkar felt a sharp pain shoot through his arm and quickly pulled back, surprised. The human had actually managed to hurt him, if only slightly. His respect for her increased by a fraction. Interesting, he acknowledged. You have been studying Vorthak anatomy, but knowledge without power is still useless. This time he attacked with two arms simultaneously, his secondary appendages joining the assault. Sarah found herself forced backward as she tried to defend against the flurry of claws. Thexkar could see her struggling, could see the moment when her defense would inevitably collapse, but instead of collapsing, something strange happened. Sarah's breathing shifted, becoming deeper and more controlled. Her movements became more fluid, less reactive. When Thexkar's next attack came, she didn't try to block it. She redirected it, using his own momentum against him. For the first time in decades, Thexkar found himself slightly off balance. You fight like prey trying to survive, he snarled, pressing his attack harder. But predators always win in the end. On Earth, Sarah said quietly, still moving in that strange, flowing pattern. The difference between predator and prey isn't always clear. Thexkar decided to end this farce. He feinted with his primary arms while his secondary appendages struck from unexpected angles. It was a technique that had never failed him, combining misdirection with overwhelming force. Sarah seemed to anticipate the move. She dropped low, sweeping her leg in an arc that caught Thexkar behind his knee joint. As he stumbled, she rose and drove her elbow upward with surgical precision, striking the nerve cluster at the base of his neck. Pain exploded through Thexkar's nervous system. For a moment, his vision blurred and his legs nearly buckled. The hit hadn't been particularly hard. He'd taken much worse from opponents twice Sarah's size, but it had been perfectly placed, striking exactly the right spot to cause maximum disruption to his motor functions. Lucky shot, he gasped, shaking his head to clear it. But Sarah was already moving again, and Thexkar realized with growing alarm that she wasn't getting tired. If anything, she seemed to be getting stronger, more focused. Each exchange taught her more about his fighting style, his reach, his timing. The other cadets watched in stunned silence as their human classmate began to systematically dismantle their instructor's seemingly overwhelming advantages. She couldn't match his strength or speed, but she didn't need to. Every movement was efficient, calculated, designed to exploit the tiny openings in his defense. Thexkar felt something he hadn't experienced in years: uncertainty. This wasn't how the demonstration was supposed to go. He was the apex predator here, the evolved killing machine. The human was just a soft creature from a backwards planet. Enough! He roared, abandoning all pretense of instruction. All four arms struck simultaneously in a pattern designed to pulverize rather than educate. Sarah's response was immediate and brutal. She caught his primary right arm at the wrist, pivoted on her heel, and used the full power of her rotation to drive her elbow into his shoulder joint. The impact was accompanied by an audible crack. Thexkar's roar of pain echoed through the training facility. His right arm hung useless at his side, the joint dislocated and possibly fractured. Sarah had struck with the precision of a surgeon and the force of someone who knew exactly how much damage the Vorthak physiology could absorb. How? He wheezed, backing away from the small human who had just crippled one of his limbs. You asked about my death world, Sarah said, her voice still perfectly calm despite the violence she had just unleashed. The thing about Earth isn't the predators or the environmental hazards. It's that everything is trying to kill everything else, all the time. We don't have the luxury of specialized evolution like most species. We had to become adaptable. She gestured to her unremarkable human form. No claws, so we learned to make tools. No thick hide, so we learned to avoid damage rather than absorb it. No overwhelming strength, so we learned to be precise. We learned to study our enemies, to find their weaknesses, to turn their advantages against them. Thex-Kar looked around the training room and realized that something fundamental had shifted. The other cadets were no longer looking at him with fear and respect. They were looking at the human who had just defeated their supposedly invincible instructor using nothing but skill and knowledge. You think this makes you superior? He snarled, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. No, Sarah replied. I think it makes me human. The training session officially ended, but word of what had happened spread through the academy like wildfire. By the next day, every cadet and instructor knew that the small human from the death world had put their most feared combat instructor in the medical bay. But Thex-Kar was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. As he lay in the regeneration tank, watching Biogel repair his damaged shoulder, he plotted his revenge. The human had embarrassed him in front of his students, damaged his reputation, and challenged the natural order of the galaxy. That could not stand. The Vorthak had rules about such things, ancient codes that demanded satisfaction for dishonor. Thex-Kar began making plans for a more private encounter with Cadet Chen, one where there would be no witnesses and no regulations to protect her. Sarah, meanwhile, continued her training as if nothing had happened. She attended her tactical classes, studied galactic military history, and practiced with her fellow cadets. But she was not naive about the situation. She had seen the look in Thex-Kar's eyes as he was carried to the medical facility. She had grown up on a world where predators held grudges, and she knew that the real confrontation was yet to come. The training room had been just the beginning. What happened next would determine whether humanity's reputation in the galaxy would be built on respect or fear. As she prepared for sleep in her dormitory, Sarah reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. 3 years ago, she had been a civilian on Earth, working as a paramedic in one of the most dangerous cities on the planet. She had seen violence, dealt with predators both human and animal, and learned to survive in an environment that killed the unprepared. Now she was among the stars, representing her species in an academy designed to train the galaxy's future military leaders. The irony was not lost on her that her Deathworld upbringing, which many species viewed as a disadvantage, was turning out to be her greatest strength. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she suspected that Commander Thex-Kar would be the least of her problems. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but Sarah Chen was a human from Earth, and that meant she was already prepared for whatever the universe might throw at her. The real test was just beginning. The regeneration therapy had worked faster than expected. Within 2 days, Commander Thex-Kar was released from the medical facility with his shoulder joint fully restored. The biogel treatment had not only repaired the damage, but it also enhanced the joint's natural resilience. He flexed his 4 arms experimentally, savoring the return of his full combat capability. But the physical healing had done nothing for his wounded pride. Word of his defeat had spread beyond the academy walls. He had received 3 formal challenges from other Vorthak commanders who viewed his loss to a soft species as a sign of weakness. His own military caste was questioning his competence, and worst of all, the human cadets throughout the academy were being treated with a new level of respect that grated against everything he believed about galactic hierarchy. The natural order demanded correction, and Thexakar knew exactly how to provide it. Late that night, he made his way through the darkened corridors of the Academy's residential section. The automated security systems recognized his command codes and allowed him passage without question. His destination was the human dormitory wing, a modest section housing the dozen Earth natives currently enrolled in the Academy. Cadet Chen's quarters were at the end of the hall, a small but comfortable room with a single occupant. Thexkar had memorized her schedule and knew she would be alone, likely sleeping in preparation for tomorrow's zero-gravity combat exercises. He paused outside her door, his claws extending slightly as anticipation built in his chest. This wouldn't be a training exercise with witnesses and regulations. This would be a private lesson in the consequences of disrespecting a superior predator species. The door's security lock was military-grade, but Thexakar's command access opened it silently. He slipped inside, his natural stealth allowing him to move without sound, despite his considerable size. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of status indicators from various electronic devices. Sarah Chen sat at her desk, fully dressed and apparently working on some kind of technical project. She didn't turn around when he entered, didn't show any sign of surprise or alarm. "Hello, Commander Thexkar," she said quietly, her hands continuing to work with whatever device she was assembling. "You're earlier than I expected, but not by much." Thexkar's mandibles clicked in confusion. "You were expecting me?" "A pride-based warrior culture with strong concepts of honor and revenge," Sarah replied, finally turning in her chair to face him. "Statistical analysis suggested you would attempt some form of retaliation within 72 hours of your medical release. The timing and location were obvious variables to calculate." She gestured to her desk, where Thexkar could now see she had been working on some kind of monitoring equipment. "I've been tracking movement patterns in the residential corridors for the past 2 nights. Your biometric signature was easy to identify." Thexkar's initial confusion gave way to anger. The human had been planning for his arrival, treating his sacred quest for honor like a mathematical problem to be solved. The insult was almost worse than the original defeat. "Clever," he snarled, "but intelligence will not save you from the consequences of your arrogance. There are no witnesses here, no Academy regulations to protect you. Just predator and prey, as nature intended." Sarah stood slowly, and Thexakar noticed she moved with the same controlled grace she had shown during their training session. "You're right that we're alone," she agreed, "but you're wrong about predator and prey. On Earth, we have a saying, the most dangerous prey is the kind that hunts back." Thexkar didn't waste time with further words. He launched himself across the small room, all 4 arms extended in a coordinated attack designed to overwhelm and capture rather than kill immediately. He wanted the human conscious for what was to come. But Sarah wasn't where she had been standing. She had moved with fluid precision, sliding along the wall in a pattern that kept her just outside his reach, while positioning her near the room's emergency alarm. Thexkar realized she was trying to call for help and adjusted his attack to cut off her escape routes. "No one is coming to save you, Deathworlder," he growled, forcing her into the corner farthest from the door. "Your primitive species may have impressed some weak-minded Academy officials, but I know what you really are." Sarah's response was unexpected. She laughed, a sound completely devoid of fear or desperation. "You still don't understand, do you? You think this is about me being trapped by you, but you're the one who walked into a trap." Before Thexkar could process what she meant, Sarah pressed a button on the device she had been working with. Immediately, every electronic system in the room began broadcasting a high-frequency signal that made his translator malfunction and filled the air with an almost subsonic hum. But more importantly, the signal activated something else. The room's environmental controls shifted into emergency mode, sealing the air vents and adjusting the atmospheric composition. Within seconds, The oxygen level began dropping while the concentration of inert gases increased. It wasn't enough to kill, but it would definitely affect cognitive function and physical performance for most species. Most species, but not humans. Earth's variable atmospheric conditions had given humanity remarkable adaptability to different gas mixtures and oxygen levels. "You see," Sarah explained as Thexkar began to feel the first effects of oxygen deprivation, "humans didn't evolve to be the strongest or fastest predators. We evolved to be the smartest. We learned to modify our environment instead of adapting to it." Thexkar's vision began to blur slightly, and he found his movements becoming sluggish. But he was still a trained warrior, and desperation gave him strength. He charged forward, accepting that his coordination was compromised, but relying on brute force to overwhelm the smaller opponent. Sarah met his charge head-on, but not in the way he expected. Instead of trying to avoid or redirect his attack, she stepped directly into it, accepting the impact of his primary arms against her shoulders while driving both hands toward his center of mass. The move should have been suicide for someone her size. Thexkar's claws raked across her arms, leaving deep scratches in her uniform and drawing blood. But the pain didn't seem to register with her, and her counterattack was devastating. Her right hand struck a specific point just below his primary heart, while her left targeted a nerve cluster that controlled his secondary circulatory system. The hits weren't particularly hard, but they were placed with surgical precision, and the reduced oxygen in the room amplified their effects. Thexkar felt his strength drain away as his cardiovascular system struggled to compensate for the neural disruption. He tried to raise his arms for another attack, but they felt like they were moving through thick liquid. "Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years," Sarah said conversationally, watching him struggle. "We know every weak point in our own physiology, and we've gotten very good at finding similar weaknesses in other species. Your anatomy is actually quite similar to certain Earth predators." She stepped back and observed as Thexkar sank to his knees, his vision tunneling as his oxygen-deprived brain struggled to maintain consciousness. The interesting thing about Deathworld evolution is that it doesn't just make you tough. It makes you resourceful. When everything is trying to kill you, you learn to turn the environment itself into a weapon. Thexkar tried to speak, but his translator was still malfunctioning, and his vocal cords weren't getting enough oxygen to function properly. He could only watch as the small human who had just defeated him again moved to her desk and began shutting down the environmental modifications. "I'm returning the atmosphere to normal now," Sarah informed him matter-of-factly. "You should start feeling better in a few minutes. The effects are temporary, designed to incapacitate rather than cause permanent damage." As the oxygen levels normalized, Thexkar's vision cleared and his strength began to return. But something fundamental had changed. He was no longer looking at prey that had gotten lucky. He was looking at a predator who had planned, prepared, and executed a flawless ambush. "Why?" he gasped as his breathing returned to normal. "Why not kill me?" "I came here to hurt you." Sarah sat back down at her desk and resumed working on her device as if nothing unusual had happened. "Because killing you would solve nothing. You're not the real problem, Commander. You're just a symptom." She gestured to the academy around them. "This entire institution is built on the assumption that physical dominance equals superiority, that the strongest species naturally deserve to rule the weaker ones. It's a very simple, very primitive way of thinking." Thexkar struggled to his feet, his pride warring with a growing sense of unease. "The strong rule the weak. That is the natural order." "On Earth, we tried that philosophy for a long time," Sarah replied. "We built entire civilizations on the idea that might makes right. Do you know what happened?" Thexkar remained silent, still trying to process what had just occurred. "We almost destroyed ourselves," Sarah continued. "We learned that cooperation and intelligence were better survival strategies than domination and aggression. Not because we became weak, but because we became smart enough to realize that true strength comes from working together rather than fighting each other. She finally looked up from her work, and Thexkar was surprised to see not triumph or contempt in her eyes, but something that looked like pity. "You could have killed me in that training room," she said quietly. "You had every physical advantage, every reason to assert your dominance, but you held back because you were teaching, not fighting. That suggests your species is capable of more than just violence." The observation hit Thexkar harder than any physical blow. She was right. He could have simply killed her during the training exercise instead of trying to humiliate her. Some part of him had wanted to educate rather than destroy, even as his pride demanded satisfaction. "What happens now?" he asked, genuinely uncertain for the first time in decades. "Now you have a choice," Sarah replied. "You can continue believing that humans are weak prey animals who got lucky, in which case you'll probably try something like this again and I'll have to be less gentle next time. Or you can start thinking about what it really means that a weak species was able to anticipate, plan for, and neutralize a superior predator without breaking any Academy regulations." She stood and moved to the room's medical kit, pulling out antiseptic wipes to clean the scratches on her arms where his claws had connected. "For what it's worth," she added, "I don't think you're stupid, Commander. I think you're trapped in a way of thinking that your culture has taught you is correct. But Earth has shown us what happens when you break free of those limitations." Thexkar looked around the small room, where he had just been systematically outmaneuvered by someone a quarter his size. Everything he thought he knew about strength, about predator and prey, about the natural order of the galaxy, had been challenged and found wanting. "You said I'm a symptom, not the problem," he said slowly. "What is the problem?" Sarah sealed the last of her scratches and turned back to face him. "Fear," she said simply. "The galaxy is full of species that are terrified of change, of losing their position in the hierarchy, of discovering that they might not be as special as they thought. So they cling to simple ideas like strongest equals best, because it's easier than admitting that the universe is more complex than their ancestors imagined." She gestured to the stars visible through the room's small viewport. "Humans aren't trying to conquer anyone, Commander. We're trying to survive and learn and maybe help others do the same. But every time we demonstrate that intelligence and cooperation might be more valuable than claws and teeth, someone like you feels threatened." Thexkar found himself actually considering her words, which would have been unthinkable just hours ago. "And if I choose to think differently? Then maybe the next time you're training cadets, you focus on teaching them to think instead of just teaching them to submit," Sarah suggested. "Maybe you start wondering what other weak species might have knowledge worth learning instead of assuming they're only good for conquest." The Vorthak commander stood in the humans' dormitory room, his worldview crumbling around him like a poorly constructed fortress. Everything he had been taught, everything his species believed about their place in the universe, was being challenged by a small creature from a planet most civilized beings considered uninhabitable. But perhaps, he was beginning to think, that said more about the limitations of civilized thinking than about the inhabitants of Deathworlds. As he prepared to leave her room, Thexkar realized that this night had changed more than just his opinion of humans. It had changed his understanding of what strength really meant, and what it might cost his species if they continued to ignore the lessons that Deathworlds like Earth had to teach. The real question was whether he had the courage to act on that knowledge, or whether he would retreat back into the comfortable certainty of believing that claws and strength were all that mattered in the universe. 6 months had passed since the Knight Commander Thexkar had entered Cadet Chen's quarters seeking revenge and left questioning everything he believed about strength and superiority. The change in him had been gradual at first, almost imperceptible to outside observers. But those who knew him well began to notice small differences in his teaching methods, his interactions with cadets, and his approach to combat training. The first major sign of transformation came during a tactical exercise involving mixed species teams. Traditionally, Thex-Kar would have arranged the teams to demonstrate the natural superiority of physically dominant species, pairing strong aliens with weaker ones to show the proper hierarchy. Instead, he had done something unprecedented. He had asked the cadets to form their own teams based on complementary skills rather than species dominance. The results had been remarkable. Teams that combined human adaptability with Zephyrian speed, ethereal mental abilities with Gorlon strength, had consistently outperformed traditional hierarchy-based groups. Watching these diverse teams work together with seamless coordination had been a revelation that challenged everything Thex-Kar thought he knew about military effectiveness. But the real test of his evolving philosophy came on a routine training mission to the asteroid fields near the Academy. What should have been a simple navigation and resource-gathering exercise became something far more dangerous when long-range sensors detected an unauthorized ship operating in the training zone. The vessel's configuration was unfamiliar, its hull bearing the angular, predatory design favored by the Korth High, a species of raiders and slavers who operated from the galactic rim. They were known for capturing young cadets from military academies, selling the promising ones to illegal fighting rings, and disposing of the rest. Academy protocol in such situations was clear: retreat immediately and call for military reinforcement. The training ships were lightly armed and crewed mainly by instructors and cadets. They were no match for a dedicated raider vessel. But as the Academy ships began their withdrawal, the Korth High vessel accelerated and fired across their path, clearly intending to disable and capture rather than destroy. The raiders had probably been watching the Academy for weeks, waiting for an opportunity exactly like this. Commander Thex-Kar found himself in command of the lead training vessel, with a crew that included Sarah Chen and 11 other cadets from various species. His first instinct was to fight. Vorthak military doctrine emphasized aggressive engagement even against superior forces, but something made him pause and consider alternatives. "Cadet Chen," he said, surprised by his own words, "your species has experience with asymmetric warfare. How would humans handle this situation?" Sarah looked equally surprised by the question. 6 months ago, Thex-Kar would never have asked for tactical advice from a student, especially not a human. But she didn't hesitate to respond. "We need more information about their capabilities and intentions," she said, moving to the sensor station. "On Earth, we learned that fighting a stronger enemy head-on is usually suicide. You need to understand their weaknesses before you engage." The other cadets gathered around as Sarah began analyzing the sensor data with a methodical precision that reminded Thex-Kar of how she had prepared for his nighttime visit to her quarters. "Their ship is faster and more heavily armed than ours," she reported, "but it's also much larger and less maneuverable. They're herding us toward the asteroid field, probably planning to use the cover to disable our engines without destroying the hull." Cadet Gelton, the young Zephyrian who had been one of Thex-Kar's first opponents in the training room, spoke up. "My people have dealt with raiders before. They rely on intimidation and overwhelming force. They're not used to opponents who fight creatively." "The ethereals in my family have encountered Korth High slavers," added another cadet. "They're highly territorial and aggressive, but they also follow very rigid tactical patterns. They don't adapt well when their standard approaches fail." Thex-Kar found himself listening to perspectives he would have dismissed as irrelevant just months ago. Each cadet was contributing knowledge based on their species' unique experiences and capabilities. Instead of seeing weakness that needed to be protected, he was beginning to see diverse strengths that could be combined. "What do you propose?" he asked, addressing the entire group rather than just issuing orders. Sarah looked at the tactical display for a long moment, then turned to her fellow cadets. "We can't outfight them, but we can outthink them. They expect us to either run or fight conventionally. What if we do neither? Her plan was unlike anything Thexakar had encountered in 40 years of military service. Instead of engaging the raiders directly or attempting to flee, she suggested using the asteroid field itself as both weapon and shield. The training ships would separate, each taking a different route through the densest part of the field while transmitting false sensor readings to confuse the Korth High targeting systems. But the real brilliance lay in what happened next. While the raiders were chasing sensor ghosts through the asteroids, the training ships would regroup on the far side of the field and coordinate a precision strike against the raider vessel's engine core. Not to destroy it, but to disable it and trap it in the asteroid field where Academy reinforcements could arrive to capture rather than destroy. It's risky, Sarah acknowledged. If we miscalculate the timing or if they adapt faster than expected, we'll be trapped with them. But it gives us the best chance of saving everyone without unnecessary casualties. The old Thexakar would have rejected such a complex plan in favor of a direct assault that honored Vorthak military traditions. But the new Thexakar found himself analyzing the proposal with genuine consideration. The plan requires precise coordination between all ships, he said slowly. Each crew must trust the others completely. One mistake could doom all of us. Yes, sir, Sarah agreed. But that's what we've been training for. Not to fight alone, but to fight together. Thexakar looked around at the mixed group of cadets, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time. These weren't weak creatures that needed his protection or empty vessels waiting to be filled with Vorthak military wisdom. They were intelligent beings with their own knowledge, their own strengths, their own contributions to make. Implement the plan, he ordered. What followed was the most complex military operation Thexakar had ever been part of. The training ships scattered into the asteroid field like startled prey, transmitting false signals and creating sensor shadows that made it appear as if they were damaged and struggling to escape. The Korth High ship followed exactly as predicted, its captain probably counting the profits from captured Academy cadets. But while the raiders hunted phantoms, the real ships were executing a careful dance through the asteroids, using gravitational fields and electromagnetic interference to mask their true positions. Cadet Gelton's natural speed and reflexes made him the ideal pilot for the most dangerous passages, while the ethereal cadets used their mental abilities to coordinate timing across all ships despite communication blackout. Sarah coordinated the overall operation with a calm precision that reminded Thexakar of ancient Vorthak battlefield commanders, but with a flexibility and adaptability that his rigid military training had never taught him. She adjusted the plan in real time as conditions changed, incorporating suggestions from other cadets and modifying tactics based on the raiders' responses. When the moment came for the final coordination, all 6 training ships emerged from the asteroid field simultaneously, their combined firepower focused on a single point on the Korth High vessel's hull. The target wasn't chosen for maximum damage, but for maximum system disruption. Within seconds, the raider ship found its engines offline and its navigation systems compromised. Korth High vessel, Thexakar transmitted on standard emergency frequencies. You are disabled and surrounded. Surrender now and you will be treated according to galactic law. The response was a stream of curses in the guttural Korth High language, followed by attempts to restart their engines. But Sarah's targeting had been perfect, and the damage would require extensive repairs that couldn't be completed in open space. When Academy reinforcements arrived 2 hours later, they found the raider vessel helplessly drifting, while 6 training ships maintained careful watch. The cadets had not only survived an encounter with professional pirates, they had captured them intact using tactics that would later be studied at military academies across the galaxy. But the real transformation came in the aftermath, during the formal debriefing with Academy officials. When asked to explain how a training mission had resulted in the capture of a notorious raider vessel, Thexkar did something that shocked everyone present. He gave full credit to his cadets. The victory belonged to Cadet Chen's tactical planning, he reported. Cadet Gelton's piloting expertise, the ethereal cadet's coordination abilities, and the combined efforts of all species involved. My role was simply to recognize their capabilities and trust them to execute their plan. Admiral Corinth, the Academy's highest-ranking official, studied Thexkar with obvious confusion. "Commander, this is highly unusual. Military tradition dictates that the commanding officer takes responsibility for both victory and defeat." "Yes, sir," Thexkar agreed. "But military tradition also assumes that commanding officers are the most capable individuals in any given situation. I have learned that this assumption may be limiting." The admission sent ripples through the Academy's command structure. If a Vorthak commander was acknowledging that other species might possess superior capabilities in certain areas, it challenged the fundamental assumptions on which galactic military hierarchy was built. Over the following weeks, the story of the cadet victory spread throughout the Academy and beyond. But more importantly, it sparked conversations about military doctrine, species collaboration, and the nature of strength itself. Other instructors began experimenting with mixed species training exercises. Academy curricula were modified to include more emphasis on tactical diversity and adaptive thinking. Sarah Chen found herself at the center of these changes, often called upon to explain human military philosophy and Deathworld survival strategies. But she consistently deflected individual credit, emphasizing that their success had come from combining different species' strengths rather than relying on any single approach. "Humans aren't superior to other species," she would explain during strategy seminars. "We're just different. Our advantages come from our willingness to learn from everyone around us and adapt our thinking when we encounter new information." Commander Thexkar became one of her most vocal supporters, transforming from the instructor who had once sought to humiliate her into a mentor who encouraged her to push the boundaries of conventional military thinking. Their relationship became a symbol of the broader changes occurring throughout the Academy. But perhaps the most significant change was in how cadets from different species began to interact with each other. The old patterns of dominance and submission based on physical characteristics gave way to more complex relationships built on mutual respect and complementary abilities. Young Zephyrians began teaching movement techniques to Gorlon cadets, who in turn shared their knowledge of engineering and construction. Ethereals worked with humans to develop new communication protocols that combined telepathy with verbal language. The rigid hierarchies that had defined military training for centuries began to dissolve, replaced by fluid partnerships that maximized everyone's potential. A year after their initial confrontation, Thexkar and Sarah found themselves working together to design a new training curriculum that would prepare cadets for the realities of modern galactic warfare. The old model of species-based military castes was giving way to something unprecedented, truly integrated military units that drew strength from diversity rather than uniformity. "Do you ever regret that night in my quarters?" Sarah asked during one of their planning sessions. "When you realized that everything you believed about strength and weakness might be wrong?" Thexkar considered the question carefully, his forearms manipulating holographic battle scenarios that would have been impossible to conceive under the old military paradigms. "I regret the years I wasted believing that physical dominance was the only measure of worth," he replied. "But I do not regret learning the truth, even though it came at the cost of my pride." He paused, watching as human cadets worked alongside Vorthak students to solve complex tactical problems. "My species has always believed that strength comes from conquest, from imposing our will on others. But you have shown me that true strength might come from cooperation, from learning to fight together rather than fighting alone." Sarah smiled, remembering the fear and anger in his eyes during their first encounter. On Earth, we have another saying: the strongest steel is forged in the hottest fires. Sometimes breaking down is the first step toward building something better. As she spoke, alarms began sounding throughout the academy. Long-range sensors had detected an approaching fleet of unknown origin, moving toward academy space with obvious hostile intent. It would be the first real test of their new integrated training methods, and the first chance to see if their philosophy of cooperative strength could withstand the challenges of actual warfare. But that, Thexkar realized as he watched his diverse cadets spring into action with seamless coordination, would be another story entirely. For now, it was enough to know that the galaxy was changing, one converted mind at a time, and that the small human from the Deathworld had started something that would reshape military thinking across the stars. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities that had never existed before. And perhaps, Thexkar thought as he prepared to face whatever threat was approaching, that was exactly what the galaxy needed.